I just had this conversation with an individual. Probably gonna put him on the podcast. David Homnick. So he was emphasizing that Kabbalah had always been more than an intellectual philosophy, just a way of life.
Certainly.
Right? Saying like the Arizal led a community almost of Chassidim, like he had a following of cultural, practice.
Absolutely.
Like one of the things he mentioned was Kabbalah Shabbos, bringing in the Shabbos. It was a whole event. Used to go out to the field and bring in the Shabbos, this day of rest. And they made, he was the founder of this idea of going to the Rashbi, the author of the Zohar, ancient Kabbalist, Jewish scholar, up in Miron, right, the Judean hills. So this was the Arizal was really the one who started this idea of going to mystics or holy people's gravesite and kind of connecting with higher in that way. But definitely, and Chassidus, definitely from the Baal Shem Tov, which I don't know if he was, if it's found very much. Most of his writings are not necessarily available. We have maybe just a few books. We have like a compilation of almost all of his sayings, which are validated in one. It's a pretty thick book, but it's there. Most of his fame is from the stories, right? Maybe we'll show that picture, at some point in this video. The stories of how he used to go and save people and help people out, and then later, the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad Chassidus. So Chabad does focus more on the intellectual, right? So the Baal Shem Tov was more of, getting inspired by, being happy and connecting to the spiritual aspects of life. And then the Alter Rebbe came and said that we should, that the way we really awaken a love and a fear for God, the way that we basically inspire ourselves to serve and connect to what we really are, which is God, is through contemplating and understanding that. When we understand something, we bring it into action. And so that I think that's really where the focus of the intellectual aspect of Kabbalah really comes. But at the end of the day, to the very day, just a generation or two ago, there was people were almost, kind of laughed at. I wouldn't say looked down at, for focusing too much on the intellectual of the Kabbalah. It was more about like, are you an ovid? Do you work on yourself? Are you dealing with yourself? So yeah, there definitely is that aspect. But the deep connecting and making it spiritual. So I guess let's focus on that. Let's help people understand.
Certainly.
That's what I'm really. I'm in our channel. I think we're like me. We're going to focus on the intellectual. I did have this dream of mapping out, say, the Hishtalshelus, the cosmic evolution of spiritual realms, and kind of explaining it in a very down-to-earth way. When I noticed that it's not just a bunch of code names which we can't understand, it's actually something which sat in somebody's mind and was able to understand it, rather than just knowing that one word came before the other and then another one before. Almost like, it's like knowing that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You can memorize those numbers by hearts and understand them, that 1 comes before 2 and 3 and 4, and then you can actually understand that 1 represents a concept of 1, and there's 2 represents a concept of 2. These are actually code names which hold something in them.
Yes.
So that's what I wanted to focus on. Obviously, we're also going to talk about how we can connect this and the inspiration that it can bring to us in our lives.
Certainly.
Yeah. So, in short, how would you describe the 4 realms? Atzilus, Bria, Tir, and Asiya. How would you, for beginners?
Well, I want to say to your previous point that the whole separation that we have today between, the scholastic intellectual enterprise and the embodied, practiced, ritual enterprise is a fairly modern distinction, right? I think that certainly for people like the Ari, Isaac Luria, and for the Kabbalists in general, and for the Chassidic Mass that you're saying, for them, the comprehension of the nature of reality was part and parcel with their role in participating in that. For the Ari, it was the human action which was there to heal the divine, to bring back together the ruptured unity of divinity. Even in what we think about as in like a secular context of like Greek philosophy, there's been wonderful research by a French scholar, Pierre Hadot, who wrote a book called Philosophy as a Way of Life, where, speaking primarily about the ancient Greeks, people like Parmenides, but also some modern philosophers, people like Foucault, where philosophy for them was not just an intellectual enterprise. It wasn't just this abstract academic activity that you think about, and then you close your books and go home and do your thing. But it really was about a practice which was supposed to transform the individual and transform the world around them as a result. And I think that that's certainly the case for Chassidus as well. Even for someone like the Alter Rebbe, who we conceptualize as sort of the architect of a rigorous metaphysic in Chassidus, like no other. We also know that the Alter Rebbe, or at least we're told that the Alter Rebbe, when he was davening, when he would pray, they would have to put pillows around the room so that he wouldn't concuss himself while he rolled around in ecstasy and fervor in his prayer. So to think about the Rebbe, to think about the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad Chassidic dynasty, as an austere, detached, cold intellectual, is just not true based on what we know biographically.
Definitely.
There's a deep relationship between the moichen, between the intellect and the midas, between the emotions and between the emotions and the actions. And I think throughout the Alter Rebbe's Torah, it's precisely about how do we bring forth that unity within us, within the divine, between the conceptual and the experiential and the practical. So I think that's important. Certainly for the Alter Rebbe, having our minds united with the mind of God and having a comprehension of the structure of reality laid out by the Kabbalists is central to that enterprise, but never in contrast or in competition with the practice, the actual practice of the ritual practice of mitzvahs and the ethical practice of being a good person as a result. Right? For me, mysticism has to equal being a kinder, more gentle, more thoughtful person, more attuned to the divinity of all reality in every moment, or else it's just another theory, right? We speak about how. So that's central, first of all.
Yeah, I think it's part. If I may interrupt a little,
sure.
I think it's part of the reason of why Kabbalah was avoided for the masses, because people can maybe get caught into it and take it in a way like. I mean, there are some very crazy ideas in Kabbalah. Like, if I choose ones, like that God is so perfect, so anything we do doesn't really affect him.
Right.
So that can take a person, into the darkest dungeons of anywhere.
Yeah.
Like, there's no meaning, no meaning at all in life. That's definitely, even this intellectual approach to Kabbalah is supposed to be brought into feelings. Obviously, like you mentioned, the Alter Rebbe's part of his work was how we bring it down into our day-to-day lives and affect us and inspire us.
Yeah. In terms of the, I'm glad we're in agreement. Also glad
I understand that it could have been misunderstood.
Also glad to disagree where it's also part of the
sure
beauty.
We'll find some disagreements here.
Good. I hope so. If we just agree about everything, then there wasn't any need for two of us in this world.
Right. You have a bit of a more brushed up English.
It's let's Ireno Harav. Sometimes you spend too long in the Olam HaGashmi, you pick up too much Gashmis. Anyhow, so Abiya, Atzilas Bria Tzir Asiya. So the way I've been thinking about the schema of the four worlds, and it's always 4/5, right? Because there's always that world
exactly
pre-Atzilus, the world of Akkad and Kalman, Kesser, called different things variously. How do we understand this? So firstly, to clarify, as we were saying earlier, these are not, when we speak about, what do we mean when we say world? Let's begin with that, right? Because we talk about four worlds, people start thinking about 4 planets, for
Right.
universes. Like,
Right.
do I take a rocket ship to get there?
Exactly.
So, what is a world? A world, firstly, olam, and this is repeated constantly within Chassidut. The Hebrew word for world is olam. Olam, says Chassidus repeatedly, is Miloshin helem. Helem is concealment, hiding. How would you translate helem?
Concealment, I think.
Concealment,
Yeah.
contraction, something like that. That there's a divine reality which is infinite and overwhelming in its infinitude. The truth of reality in front of which nothing can stand, and it's a clear tenet in Kabbalah and Chassidus. And in order to create the possibility of otherness, of me and you, of world, there needs to be a concealment on the absolute infinite reality, which is all things, which is God. Because in the presence of that, nothing exists. Everything simply returns to its infinite, ultimate nothingness. So there's a process of I've heard Tzimtzum and Hishtalshelus translated as what's the word that was used? Wow, I'm slipping the word now.
Contraction?
No, not contraction. Concatenation, or I can't remember the word right now. Anyhow, a process of diminishment after diminishment after diminishment until there's a state where the truth of reality is obscured somehow.
Right.
And Chassidus is using many metaphors to describe this process. And Chassidus and Kabbalah, where these metaphors are being borrowed from, is constantly reminding us and warning us to to unpack these words from their physical reference. So one of the most common metaphors used within the system of Kabbalah and subsequently Chassidus, we speak about the divine light, Ein Sof, the infinite light. And Chassidus and Kabbalah warns us that if we think about this as physical light coming out of light bulbs, we've misunderstood. Light is a metaphor. The same way that light illuminates, the same way that light shines light upon something, shows us what's happening, allows us to perceive. Light is related to cognition. So it's a metaphor for what's going on. In the presence of a infinite light and infinite knowing and infinite conception, there would be no space for doubt, for otherness, for separation, for journey, for growth, for perfection and imperfection. And the process of tzimtzum, the process of this concatenation, I think that might be the word. The process of this diminishment is to create, and the metaphors used in Kabbalah are very physical metaphors, right? We speak about the parcels, the curtains, which hold back that light, but which hold back this infinite, ultimate knowing. Maybe to use a bit of a modern kind of vogue metaphor. If someone's dropped like a tab of acid and they're having a crazy psychedelic trip, right? So they're seeing the light. People might say that's a metaphor. It's very hard for them to go then and make scrambled eggs and feed their kids, right? It's very hard to have a life with separation and boundaries and otherness when you're fully bo'orot, as we might say in Hebrew, when you're fully overwhelmed by the infinity of that. That's with us in every moment, right? If we were exposed to the full reality that's in every moment, we would lose our marbles. We would have what Kabbalah calls a shiras hakelim. Our vessels would shatter. Now, when we talk about things like light and shattered vessels, very common motifs, there are no pottery, vessels that are broken somewhere cosmically. It means that to have otherness, there needs to be containment, there needs to be reduction, there needs to be the capacity to not see the full reality totally at every moment. If there was a full revelation of that consciousness, we would not handle it. We would return to the everything nothingness which we are in every moment. And there's a very fine balance, this very fine-tuned reality that we live in is this perfect amount of reduction of that awareness so that we can journey towards it slowly and learn to perceive it as our true selves without being overwhelmed by it in any moment. That's kind of a general metaphysical schema of what's going on in a kind of psychological register. So within that, I'm not explaining this to you. I'm explaining this to the audience. These things that you're well aware of. Within that, there's a complex, perhaps even Baroque, long and detailed system of how we move from that space, how we conceptually traverse from that space of infinite presence to the space of finitude which we inhabit and live in. And many of the Kabbalists describe that as a ladder. A common image taken from the book of Genesis is the Sulam Yaakov, the ladder of Jacob. Jacob has a dream. He sees a ladder which stretches from earth to heaven, and the angels are going up and down. And the Kabbalists speak about Seder Hishtalshelus, this order of spiritual evolution from the infinite to the finite, as the ladder through which that process takes place. And again, we have to like constantly remind ourselves that we're not talking about a lateral binary process from up to down, from here to somewhere else. We're talking about a conceptual, a sequential process, right? But it's a ladder which is traversed in bidirectionally, the same way that the angels go up and down,
Right.
and the same way that the angels in the vision of Ezekiel chapter 1, the famous Ma'aser Merkava, the vision of the throne, which becomes the bedrock perhaps of all of Jewish mysticism.
Right.
The angels are ratzim v'shavim, they're running and returning, right? There's this systolic and diastolic, this back and forth that's constantly happening, this ratzu v'shuv,
Right.
this to and fro that is built into the nature of reality, the heartbeat of reality, the tide pulling in and out. So the divine energy, the the light, the shefa, the fusion, the overflow from the divine, constantly is invigorating our reality, as you said earlier, constantly bringing the world into being.
Right.
For the Kabbalists, creation, revelation, and redemption are constantly taking place. It's not a historical moment that God reveals, but in every moment, as indicated by many rabbinic, midrashic sayings. And it's on that ladder as well that not just the divine, so to say, descends, and I say so to say because we have to think non-directionally about that. We have to keep pushing these words away from us and try to take out what they're trying to convey to us. And we can try to do that here. We can try to actually get real about what it means to actually get to the kernel of it. But so within that process, there's also a way in which we climb the ladder back up to the divine, and that's very important to the Kabbalists. We can think about it, perhaps a way of thinking about it is that there are levels of reality, and by that I mean there are things that are real, more real and less real, right? How real is a word, is a human construct? It's to us, we intuitively we can intuit that it's less real than something material like a table. You know that you can refer to a table by many names, but a table is a table.
Right.
So there's something more real about the materiality of the table than the words we call it. And further than that, we could say that the table is a function of being able to, let's say, a dining room table to hold food so that we can eat and survive. In some ways, our survival is more real and more important than the table. And there's sort of this process of abstraction from the less real, right, to the more and more real. And what happens throughout philosophy and throughout Kabbalah is that they're moving along this process of abstraction, and you can go in either direction, either from let's identify what's less real towards the more real, or let's begin with the most real. And the most real, depending whichever way you go, ends up being that which must exist, that which is a prerequisite for existence itself, or the way that the Jewish philosophers and Kabbalists refer to it as mechuyev hametzius, that which is mandatorily existent, that without which reality cannot be conceived.
That is the most real.
That is the most real. That which must be, right? Anything else is the Kabbalists and Jewish philosophers.
Real to who?
Real as in if we really stop to think about what constitutes reality, right? There must be a grounds of reality. There must be something upon which reality is built. And the medieval philosophers extrapolate all kinds of things about what is the nature of the thing. It must be one, it must be immaterial, it must be infinite. Real.
So what is this? Let's talk about what is this real thing which must be?
What it is the grounds of existence itself, right? It's almost a tautology to say, and I'll say to posit anything, right? And this is a very, very classic like medieval argument. It takes the form of like ontological argument and others, that in order for something to be, right, there must have been something that brought it into existence, right? Nothing comes from nothing, or nothing comes from, right? Ex nihilo nihilo fit, from nothing comes nothing. If you follow that logic, it both in a causal chain but also in a conceptual chain, there must be something which predicates existence itself, right? That any particular existence is predicated on the notion of existence itself, which itself must be predicated on a substratum which allows for existence to come into being. And simply put, that's what the philosophers refer to as mechuyev hametzius, that which must exist.
So we don't know what that is. We can't really describe it.
We can't describe it other than saying it's that which must exist, and even to say that it exists, and this is clear within Kabbalah and Chassidus, even to say that it exists is to put it into relation and category with what we conceive as existence, and that's already a false that's already a false comparison.
Right. In other words, we need to understand that it's something beyond this.
It's precisely, it's something beyond what we can even comprehend as existence. It's the grounds for existence, right? And this is not even Kabbalah. This is just philosophy. This is just Hakira. The Chiddush of Kabbalah, I think, is twofold. One is to say that that thing, which is the ground of existence, upon which existence is predicated, is also your ground of being. It is also the core of you and your identity, your soul. In the language of Chassidus, that your neshama, your soul, is a chelik elikami mal mamash, is that unknowable, infinite ground of being itself, right?
Why is that a Kabbalistic novelty?
Because for general medieval and for general Jewish philosophy, the human is seen as afsharas metzius, as that which is contingent existence. The human doesn't have to exist. We happen to exist, but that existence is contingent, it's not necessary.
Okay.
We can, and what's classic within medieval and then later Renaissance Jewish philosophy is that the human is kind of this figure who can scale the ladder up and down, Jacob's ladder that we spoke about earlier, the ladder of reality, that we can move into greater levels of reality. For the Kabbalist, and specifically emphasized by the Chassidic thinkers, the core of the human is the infinite divine essence, is the ground of being itself. And more so, for the Kabbalists, the process of enumerating the way in which the ground of being itself emerges, being as we know it into reality, to all the way down to our physical reality, that is the process of Seder Hishtalshelus.
Right.
And the stages along the way, going through, and it's really a drama along the way of cataclysm, of rupture, of reconstruction, through the 10 Sefirot in their various forms, all the way down into the four worlds, each one made up of the 10 Sefirot as well.
Right.
That is the process, and we haven't even touched on what the four worlds are in themselves, but that is the process through which the infinite unknowable ground of reality itself, the only thing which must exist, comes to bring existence into reality.
I'm a little troubled by one of the things said up at the beginning of this segment, and that is that there are different. We spoke about how there's different planes of being real, right? So there's the word table, and then there's the table. So the table is the real thing
relative to the word.
The word is just the word.
Yeah.
A word, not even the idea.
Right.
Then we said that even more real than that would be that which must be.
Yeah. Yeah, we skipped some steps along the way. Like we could say, for example, that we know even from a contemporary scientific standpoint that the table is just a collection of atoms, right?
Right.
And so we could go down a process of sort of deepening and deepening and deepening until like magnifying further and like zooming in, until what we find is that which grounds the necessity of being itself.
Right. I understand, but that I feel like the physical reality that we have, that is the lowest level, and then the more spiritual you get is more real on a spiritual level, and less real on to the physical, to the pure physical. So I guess I'll steal your part of the Abiya, and we'll give it back to you in a second. I'll try to make it really short. So there's this is how I understand it. So we have the physical world, tangible, the things which we can touch with our five senses. And then there is a plane of something. There's the tzura. There is the so to speak the meaning within everything, the shape, literally translated the shape. So, in other words, if everything is made out of physical atoms and molecules, then nothing would have meaning just in that way. The second things start getting a shape and form into specific elements, and then into things which we can use as people and into people, then suddenly these things have meaning.
Mm-hmm.
They have a conceptual meaning, and then there's an even deeper level of reality, which is more spiritual and the meaning. Let's say the meaning of a table and a human.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between a human and a table is just it's a very physical meaning, but it's a meaning. And then there's how the human and the table serve a greater cause, a more divine thing, and I guess that would be a level higher. And then I guess is the divine itself,
Mm-hmm.
all the way up there.
Mm-hmm.
The way I would understand it is like this. So we have, I think this is a bit of what the Rambam, Maimonides, is how he describes God, that God is basically this intellectual singularity.
Mm-hmm.
All the ideas, everything just in one. So obviously the second it's in one, there's no individual ideas, and it's just not the way we know it. It's something else. It's spiritual. It's infinite. It's not tangible. And he says himself, this is not something we can understand. It's something which we understand is. And then from that intellectual singularity, the second it's spread, so obviously it descends from true pure infinity into a bit of a more separated realm of existence, where there are ideas. So let's say we would say that the idea of time and space, and then once we have the idea of time and space, we can get actual time and space. Once we have time and space, we can have things that fill that time and space. So I would feel that the physical, the things that fill the time and space, is the lowest realms, and I guess the time and space themselves are some sort of a bit of a spiritual, ascent from there.
Mm-hmm.
Time is definitely spiritual. We know that time comes from the constant creation, like you mentioned before, the Ratzon Shuv, the retreat and the coming back of the energy, the infinite energy coming from pure infinity to physicality and just can't stay there, so it retreats. That creates time. So I guess there is some spirituality, and then there's the that's basically how I would view the four worlds. I'm saying this because you mentioned that it sounded like you were saying that the most real thing, even from a physical perspective, is that which must be, which I feel that's the highest.
Right.
Spirituality.
Right. Yeah, you're right that the metaphor that I was giving was a bit contrary to the way that Chassidus would structure, and that might have been a bit confusing, and I'll take that back.
All right.
It was a physical metaphor to understand that within our mundane, let's say secular perception of reality, we can see that there is a more real, less real on a material plane. But certainly from within the Kabbalistic structure, you're right, that the particular individual material instantiation of a thing is predicated on the idea of that thing, right? So you spoke about the tsura, the form of the object, which is a notion which goes back all the way to the ancient philosophers, that you have tsura and chaimer, you have form and matter, and for the classic philosophers of antiquity in the Middle Ages, the tsura, the form of the thing, the idea of the thing, the purpose of the thing, perhaps we could also translate, is more real than the chaimer, right? And you can have the chaimer, the matter, the material, could be deficient, could be made up of other things, but what's really real is the form of it. And part of the process of abstraction is moving to more unified realms of form, until we come to the ultimate form, which is the one, or the good. What complicates the process a little, and I'm curious what your take on this is that from the perspective of Chassidus, more explicitly than Kabbalah, there is also a move that's made, and this is kind of funny. You're kind of taught all about this whole Seder Hishtalshelus, how we get from the ultimate, that which transcends all forms, the one, God, whatever the term is going to be used, or Ein Sof, down into the material instantiation, the Asiya Gashmi, the physical world that we live in, and then Chassidus will come and tell us that that's all true from within an ordinary conception of a structured delineation of Seder Hishtalshelus, of Ilay v'Alul, of cause and effect from the one to the many, from the infinite to the finite. But really, in some sense, there's not only is there a way of not seeing this thing in a linear progression, what we might call something like mamali, but there's also a way that we can understand how really the soif ma'aseh b'machshava tchila, the final manifestation of reality of this physical world, is actually the point of all reality. And we see this very clearly in the Alter Rebbe and others, who writes that that all of the upper worlds mean nothing to the divine. They're all here just to serve. So we go from thinking first that the more spiritual, the more real, something like Atzilus is greater, more real, more close to God. Right? The word literally means, one of the etymologies is etzle, that it's close to the divine. To a more radical conception that what actually matters is this material world.
Right.
That's kind of the first step in that deconstruction. And then the second step is to say that really the whole narrative of Seder Hishtalshelus is also not really the full story. And there's a logic of etzem, of the divine essence, and God is here equally as much in this material world, maybe even more in the material world. Sometimes we use that expression used more in the upper world, because God is not spiritual, and in some ways materiality and physicality, on the logic of etzem, of the divine essence, is even more present, which kind of does away with a lot of the logic of Seder Hishtalshelus, right?
Yeah.
Because it takes away, it brings the proximity of the divine, of the infinite, right here, as opposed to up there along the chain.
To the extent that we say that the whole Seder Hishtalshelus is not necessary.
Right. Yeah.
It's by God's will.
I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious how, with a project that's centered, insofar as I understand, on trying to explain Seder Hishtalshelus, how do you grapple with the deconstruction of Seder Hishtalshelus from the perspective of Chassidus?
In other words, how do I grapple with the fact that Chassidus says that it's unnecessary?
Yeah, pretty much.
And how do I grapple with the fact that Atzmus, God himself, the essence, beyond anything we could imagine.
Yeah. Which I think makes a shamble of Seder Hishtalshelus, right?
Is right here.
Yeah.
And we don't, and Hishtalshelus just serves that.
Or Hishtalshelus is kind of a narrative which is not a necessary narrative once we've come to a comprehension of essence, because essence it's this like totalizing and flattening idea.
Right.
I'm playing devil's advocate. Of course, there's an importance of Seder Hishtalshelus.
Right.
I'm just curious how you're seeing it.
I have to admit, I don't know if I understood all the words you said, but I think I got the idea. I think I know what you're asking. Let me just say what I think you're asking. So basically, so there's the essence. Let's reach to the essence of God himself, right? So if I'm a caveman sitting, nobody told me anything. For some reason, I was abandoned in a cave from a very young age, and a bear came and raised me. And then, at the age of 20, I started thinking about life and trying to understand everything. And so I look around, I see things, and I'm like, hey, things come from things. Where did everything come from? What's at the core of everything? And I guess we're gonna have to skip a bit of the logic, and basically everything comes from somewhere, and whatever that is needs to be not this. It needs to be more spiritual. It must be, right? And that's where everything comes from. So let's say first I'd understand. Okay, so space, things need to be in space, but space must exist with time, and time must exist with space. There's obviously a lot of details to that, and it depends from which perspective we're coming. And then if you have two things, then that means each one can't exist without the other. So then maybe there's one thing which holds within it time and space, the concept of everything, which is there. And then, so we say like, that must be, right? It must be. Because it's beyond everything. And it's not necessarily something. Then I can come and tell you, but wait a second. So it is. It exists. I'm trying to remember the train of logic. What I'm trying to get to is basically there's there's this plane of thought of, well, let's take it this way. So I've proven to you now that there's this existence which must be, right? And then I could tell you, but wait a second. How do you know it must be? Maybe it doesn't need to be. In fact, nothing must be. You can't prove that anything needs to be. So how can you prove to me that there's something which needs to be? No. It doesn't need to be. Anything could be. I apologize for being so repetitive. It's not flashing in my mind right now. So then I would say, how do you know everything could be and nothing needs to be? In other words, the statement, nothing needs to be, is a definitive statement, right? And you can try to say, oh, I'm not saying a definitive statement that everything could be. Really what I'm saying is, how do you know that there is something which must be? I'm not saying a definitive statement. I'm just saying, how do you know? I'm asking, right? But no, that question is a definitive statement. You're saying nothing needs to be. In other words, there's something which is telling you that everything in our experience is fake. In other words, when we say, well, how do you know nothing needs to be? It comes from the fact that I'm human and I understand that my brain is limited. And everything that I understand and force to be in my mind is within my physical experience, which is fake. So nothing needs to be. But that understanding that everything is fake, everything, even the greatest idea that I can think of is fake, fiction of my imagination. Where does it come from? It comes from something which is beyond me, something which is not only beyond me, beyond what I can imagine as being the ultimate source of me, which is already infinitely beyond me. It's something which is completely removed, completely disconnected from anything I can describe or say. In other words, I'm trying to, because I understand how limited I am as a human and now how I have zero right to build an image of God, it's beyond anything that I've ever built in my mind or anything possible. It's just beyond. That's how I see Atzmus, the essence, the total essence, which is totally beyond. And then I tell you, but we're sitting here at a table speaking about this, right? If we're speaking about it, so that means we're not talking about the thing itself. We can very closely understand this. Even when I speak about myself, or right now I see you, let's say, in a very physical sense, I see you. I see your physical image. So the light from you is coming into my eyes. In other words, I don't really see you. I see light bouncing off you coming into my eyes. You, I don't see. That's why I think light is is what Chassidus and Kabbalah is using to explain all the cosmic evolution of everything. In other words, you never get the essence of anything. You're just getting something from it, a piece of information from it. And that is also true to people that we know. When we speak when we're speaking right now, you're not even getting what I'm saying. You're getting sound waves coming from me. And then I'm trying to convey an idea or a feeling. You're not getting the actual idea or feeling. You're forming that idea or feeling in your own mind. You're imagining me. You have absolutely nothing of me, right? So when we sit here and describe the essence of God, and even with all that effort to completely remove whatever that is from us, and say that he doesn't even need to be. He's beyond needing to be, which needs to be somehow. that is all our conversation. That's how we talk about it. In other words, that's how we look at that. What it really is just totally beyond. Like, it's just, we can't even talk about it. So that's the essence of everything. That's the depth of everything. And we didn't even speak about it. We didn't say anything about it. And everything comes from there. It doesn't need to. It just, that's how he decided to do it. That's just how it was done. This is where we are. I guess the value of the whole Hishtalshelus, everything that we have in between, well, from a Kabbalistic perspective, is we accept, we receive that this is, Kabbalah. Kabbalah means tradition. It was received. In other words, we received this from a generation, which received it from a generation, which reaches all the way back to Abraham, which received this information from God himself. There was this revelation. He got this information, and we're accepting that. There was Moses at Mount Sinai. We were all there, and this tradition has been passed down generation, and we have been told that we have all this spirituality sitting between whatever's all the way up there, not all the way here, it's actually down here, but between real or beyond real and us is all this spiritual information. That's one way we can look at it. And I guess from a very, very mundane, logical way, we can kind of look at it as in this is all valuable information, because how did I discover that ultimate beauty and infinity? How did I discover it? By first building my way up and realizing, he's greater than me. Or there's something out there. And then getting deeper and deeper and deeper. So I guess if I was just totally logical, I don't know, maybe I would feel it's not right for me to throw away all this information, which was so helpful for me. It's not respectful, I guess. I don't know how to say this. I just this is how I got there. So I guess it is valuable somehow. But I mean, when we discuss that, essence, instead of taking it in a bad way, we want to take it in a good way. That great infinity, which has no meaning, and is the source of all meaning, and is beyond being the source of all meaning, is good. It is what you like. This is what you like. You want to connect it, and you could have a connection to it. That's the direction we take, and obviously we can't decide that. And I think that's part of the beauty of this idea of saying that this reality, this existence, this God is so far beyond us and is so meaningless to us. But still, we can become part of that and connect to it in a way which is meaningful to us. And I think this is what ties back to your question on, Chassidus coming and kind of deleting the necessity of all of Hishtalshelus. In other words, what's important to us, all this meaningfulness and how it's connected to us, that's pretty much all the spirituality in between. From the stages of saying that God is a man with a sword in heaven, to going beyond that and saying that he's an intellectual singularity, to going beyond that and saying that he must be, to going beyond that and saying that we can't even say he must be, and then to saying that we've just been talking about something which we can't really talk about. All of that information is our connection and relationship to that. So if we're, in other words, how do I connect? When I do something physical, when I do a good deed, I give somebody charity, so I've done something good, I've helped another person. What's the meaning in that, right? look at if you're a rock, you're a stone. If you're an atom, if you're one of the atoms in that coin, and you're right near those atoms which are in my finger, and you're parting, and you say bye to your fellow atom, and now you come into the other person, hand, and you see a whole new group of atoms, and everyone looks the same. There's no meaning. Just nothing happened. Nothing happened. We're moving all the time anyways. We atoms always, they're all moving around, right? Electrons just spinning around all the time. Nothing happened, right? The meaning is when we become, if we're animals, so then there's meaning. Let's say if we're looking for food, so we take the food from there and bring it into us, and now I can experience being alive if I'm an animal. And then if I elevate myself to the level of a human and say, no, there's meaning, there's goodness, I'm making a person feel good, I'm helping somebody else. And then there's even higher than that, that there's a purpose, there's a soul, and there's all of reality here for a reason. And when I did this action, this is meaningful for some reason. So that is all meaningful to us. And then we can say, oh, but to the very high divine, that means nothing. He just chose that we should do that. I think, and I feel this what Chassidus is saying, and I really, I relate to it. If the divine, which needs nothing, we can't talk about, within his own imagination or decision, just decided one day, I'm gonna, okay, you know what, I want this. Well, obviously he doesn't want things like we want it. I drink water because I'm thirsty. I needed that water to fill a void in me. But when he does anything, there's no void. Everything's perfect. But still, from within that essence, he decided, whatever decided means, and whatever he means, there to decide that when I do something spiritual, and I give somebody charity, I'm helping a person which is going to die, a human which is meaningless. So it's only meaningful to me. And if I go a spiritual level higher, I'll realize that even that is meaningless. And to God, whatever spiritual high and atoms parting from each other and meeting in others is all equal. In other words, spirituality, the great spirituality which we've envisioned and created in our minds, is equal to God as those atoms parting from each other and connecting to others. There's no meaning in anything. But the second God decides that no, there is meaning. And now the connection between the spiritual, which looks at those atoms and says, you guys are meaningless, and the atoms which look at the spiritual and say, you guys don't exist. When we put that together and we say, you're both meaningful, and in fact, where will all this spiritual greatness and connection happen? Down here in the physical. The way I view it is that eternal essence here. That's what it is. In other words, the spiritual looks at the atoms and says, you guys are meaningless. The atoms look at the spiritual and say, you don't exist. But the second they both come together and the spiritual says to the atoms, you've just done something in me. Big, something big. And the atoms look at the spiritual and say, oh, you do exist. We're one. I exist for you. That's only possible from this essence, from this thing which is beyond thing, beyond our imagination. And this is where it's happening. How's that?
I think it's yeah, well said. It's challenging because it's an explosive category. It's very destabilizing. It really it really makes us need to, as you're demonstrating, rethink everything from the ground up and from even beneath the ground and beneath that which could be grounded up.
Yeah.
It's like a very austere first principles, very, very challenging process. And in some ways, Chassidus is calling us to be conscious and aware of that entire logic in every moment, and to operate from that space of divine arbitrariness, which is nonetheless chosen, which gives meaning and creates that bonded reality.
It really makes the whole spirituality, which we experience during prayer or doing goodness and mitzvahs, for those of us who do mitzvahs, it makes it, from meaningless to meaningful, but beyond that to real.
Essential.
I mean, meaningful is real, but yeah, essential. Yeah. In other words, when you say that, a God which needs nothing, needs you, wants you, it basically means we're like part of this essence. We are this essence. Mm-hmm. It's all happening here. Mm-hmm. This is what we are. Mm-hmm. And it's a scary idea. It's a dangerous idea. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes if you think about it for too long, depending on, everyone does things for different reasons, right? And as humans, many of us are scared. So many religions were fear-based religions. You want to scare people into doing things. So in that case, even if you're a broken person, you'll listen because you'll do these things because you're scared. Or if you're going to gain something, you're going to go into heaven after you die. Then also, most people are interested in having this eternal afterlife. But when you start thinking that we're touching a place where meaning has no meaning, and you say that this is the meaning, people can say, oh, so even if I fail and do nothing my whole life, you could almost say, like, yeah, even if I live a nihilistic life, then, I'm still connected. I'm still there. So it's a dangerous idea because it's really the opposite. When we do things as kids for candies, we're doing it for candies. And then when we get older and we want to go to heaven, or we're scared, we want to go to heaven, we want to connect to something more spiritual. And then, we want to do something, create a dwelling place for God in this world. And then we realize, oh, but he's so beyond that, so I don't need to do anything. No, you just messed up the whole plan. No, that's the point. That's the point. We need to connect. That's the whole point. We're supposed to live a spiritual life in a physical life, and that's the most, because God doesn't need us, doesn't even want us. So, any word we say in this is kind of going to work. But I guess we have to say as many words as possible to demonstrate that, it's not about a specific idea. But that's what's so meaningful about it. He doesn't need us so badly, and that's why it's so meaningful, because it's his essence. This is what he is. I wonder how can we describe it? I don't know.
So we don't do mitzvahs, or we don't do acts of goodness and kindness because they're better or more desirable than Averis or acts of maliciousness. We do them because that's who we are.
It's essence. It's the most meaningful. Like Manas Friedman likes saying, does God need your mitzvahs? Right? And he says God does need your mitzvahs. And a lot of, the Kabbalah and Chassidus scholars don't like it. What do you mean? God doesn't need anything. Right? This is what he's trying to say. He's trying to say, you can't say God doesn't need anything, because then you're telling people just jump in the lake, right? Oh, the point is that God's not needing anything makes everything that you thought he needed 10 times greater, 10 times more infinite. Because it's so beyond us and because it's so unnecessary in our human physical terms, that's what makes it so great. Because anything that us humans can appreciate is fake. Because we're humans, you know, we're limited. So I think this is what Yichud Seviv and Namali means, right? The connection of the infinite with the finite, and how that connection, because God is not the infinite or the finite, but that connection of us humans connecting to spiritual is what brings out this essence. That's really everything really is.
You're talking
What do you
good.
think?
I think there's a challenge to, as you're articulating, to demonstrate a compelling moral and religious narrative, an existential narrative, a narrative of meaningfulness from a place that's beyond meaning. And there's a certain journey to traverse from the nothingness back into the present and into the meaning. I think about a lot of the Hasidic discourses around Purim, a lot of them are of Purim, where the Rebbe, the seventh Chabad Rebbe, grapples with a lot of these questions, right? The themes of the exploration of nihilism within the divine, places of building on rabbinic motifs, where Purim is a day that transcends knowing the difference between Mordechai and Haman, between good and evil, between those fundamental polarities that civilization is built upon. And on Purim, there's some sense that we go beyond those things. And part of those discourses, which I'm sure you're familiar with, is to say that there is, in reality, in God, a place which is beyond good, beyond evil. There's a beautiful poetry in many mystical traditions about how, meet me in that field beyond the tree of good and evil, beyond where there is that reality. And somehow, even and the point of the Hasidic discourses is that even in that place, there is a return to what we conceptualize as goodness. In a divine arbitrariness, which is essential, right? It's not mandated by the logic of goodness, because good doesn't hold value anymore in that space. But something about the very identity of that which is beyond being itself has a desire for the goodness. And all these words, we're at the edges of language and beyond. But I think that there's some sort of logic, there's some sort of bridge to make that in that place of ultimate emptiness, with the essence at the core of being, to use Jewish language, and in that encounter we encounter the goodness which is beyond good, right? The goodness which is not predicated by the binary logic of good and evil. And within that, from within the Chassidic reading and the reading of the rabbinic sources, there's a reaffirmation, a rechoice of that conventional goodness. Famous to the Chassidic conception of Purim is that it's on Purim that the Jews re-accept Torah from their own free will. Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim, the Jews accept Torah. So there's a place where we move into that place of not knowing the difference between good and evil. Adlei Yalda bein
Right.
I'm there already. Ar Haman Baruch Mordechai. And then from within that place, we nonetheless choose goodness. And the sense that we can encounter the ultimate nihilism of reality, and within that have the divine power of choice, which is really which is divine and only divine, to invest ourselves in goodness and kindness. And it's a challenging one. It's a challenging case, but I think you're right. I think there's a very beautiful line from Franz Rosenzweig, a German Jewish philosopher, a colleague of Martin Buber, who says that mysticism is where atheism and theism shake hands. There is a place of nothingness where we can still speak about the divine, but we're speaking about something which is so far from any conception of God, as you're saying, that we're taught about as children. And in that place, there's a deep, deep, deep reaffirmation of the most basic ethics, which is something profound. There's something very profound in that. And I think this is very apparent in the Rebbe's Torah, in the seventh Chabad Rebbe, our Rebbe, where in the final depths of his exploration of the mysteries of reality, he comes back to the most simple childhood simplicities about God, about halacha, about Torah mitzvahs, about ethics. We return back to the lullabies of our mothers at the profoundest depths of reality.
Right.
And there's something beautifully circular about that. We began by saying not chosim b'seifan, that for the Kabbalists, a complete system, the end brings us back to the beginning. And I guess in some sense we're now returning back to the beginning again. There's something profound. It's hard to articulate, and I think what we're doing here is we're struggling at the edges of language to articulate that, which can't be articulated. But there's something very profoundly beautiful how it brings us back to a fundamental ethical recommitment, in a place beyond ethics, to a fundamental religious commitment in a place beyond religion, to a fundamental moral commitment in a place beyond morality. And there's something very exquisite and poetic about that.
Yeah. Like, I made a little video about can God create a stone that he can't lift? Right. And my conclusion is that it's not about the question. It's not about the answer. It's about the question. In other words, there's no satisfactory answer. Like, some people will tell you yes, but then can he lift it? Yes. Well, then he didn't create it. Like, I don't know if they're thinking about what they're saying, or if they're just having a play on words. I'm not really sure what's happening over there, but to me, it's just a question. You think about it. Can God create a stone he can't lift? Oh, can he create a stone? Well, he needs to be able to do everything. Then he can't lift it. Well, can he do something which he can't? And then you're like, this is beyond me. This is beyond me. It's just beyond. And that's what I think this conversation that we were having before about Atzmus, about the essence of everything. It's not about understanding it or articulating it correctly. It's about realizing this is just not. It's just not me. It's beyond. Maybe it is me, but it's beyond. It's beyond what I can articulate.
Sure.
And even that is not a perfect articulation.
Sure. Yeah.
Just beyond. It's kind of like just losing yourself kind of thing.
Yeah. It's interesting to me in the final analysis in the Rebbe's Torah, what the Rebbe comes down to is it's therefore about doing it.
Yeah.
And somehow Atzmus is about doing it.
Yeah.
Doing the act of kindness, doing the mitzvah, doing the thing.
That's why action is so meaningful. Yeah. It's not the spirituality, it's the action. Precisely. It's the action, because the action is this essence. The essence wants this to happen. Yeah.